Well, good evening. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for your patience and welcome to the 34th Annual Quest Nature Tours Social. My name is Justin Peter and I'm Director of the Quest Nature Tours branch of Worldwide Quest. The last 2.5 years have been quite interesting years. Many of us have stuck closer to home for obvious reasons, closer than we might normally do. I'm delighted that you've all stuck with us over the past couple of years and that you consider nature and conservation to be important enough to keep up your interest, to maintain your interest, and that it's an important part of your lives. So we're very pleased to see you again if you've been with us for many years. If you're new, welcome to this event where we bring, we think, interesting presentations, presenters and personalities in the naturalist world, in this case, into your home, and give you some additional insights and inspiration for future travel. Of course, until 2020, we were hosting these Quest Nature Tour Socials here in Toronto, and since that time, we've been pleased to expand our audience several-fold across North America using technology. Tonight, we have three very interesting talks that I think you'll enjoy very much. We also have a special update from our partners at Ontario Nature. And we also have door prizes, participation prizes, if you will. So we encourage you to stay with us through the end. We expect that this event will tie up by 8 p.m. tonight. And if you have to depart this event a little bit sooner than that, just be aware that we are, in fact, recording this event. And we will be providing everyone who registered with this event with a link to the recording that lets you view the event again, if you like, and you can also share it with anyone else who you think might be interested. So we have what I can say, what I'd be pleased to tell you right now. So we have a lot in store after this time of certainly reduced travel over the last couple of years. We are on the cusp of releasing a number of new tours in the next, for 2023 and 2024. So what I can tell you is tonight you have a little bit of a sneak peek with one of the talks as we are giving you sort of a pre-release look at a tour, one of the tours that we'll be releasing just next week. In other news, I should tell you that Quest Nature Tours has recently delved into the world of podcasts. We've been sponsoring a podcast that is called Talkin' Birds. That's talking with an apostrophe instead of the G. Talkin' Birds, which is a live and interactive show about wild birds and simply the beauty of nature. So if you love birds and just nature in general, we think it's one that you'll enjoy. And in fact, you can listen to Talkin' Birds this coming Sunday. It's episode 902. We have an exclusive interview there with Chris Early as he's preparing for his upcoming trip to Brazil, which is starting in just about a week. So he'll be talking about how he's preparing for that. And you can find Talkin' Birds podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, or you can go to talkinbirds.com, Talkin birds.com. So tonight, as I mentioned, we have a number of interesting presentations, I think. Our first presenters are folks that I came across almost through serendipitously, you might say, Michael and Paula Webster. And in fact, in mid-June, this past June, I was leading a bird walk for the Ottawa Field Naturalist Club. And this delightful couple were on my walk, very inquisitive and interested in everything I was talking about, showing birds, about trees and other items. And it turned out from chatting with them that they had recently moved to Canada from the United Kingdom. And it also turned out that Michael had recently published a book, which is called The Condor's Feather. And so I thought it'd be super interesting if our audience with Quest Nature Tours could get a little bit of a sneak peek into this book and an opportunity to learn more. Michael, as it turns out, suffered a vicious attack and was in treatment for years, but he had always loved nature and particularly birds, but really everything. And he found after this attack that birds really allowed him to heal Many of us know the restorative powers of nature. And repaying his debt to nature, Michael and his wife, Paula, embarked on a trip of a lifetime throughout South America, and both through photography and through film decided to document many of the things that they saw, particularly in the Andes. So for 4 years, Michael and Paula traveled the length of the Andes, which of course is the greatest mountain chain on Earth. And so from the very south of Patagonia, where they saw penguins, up beyond hummingbirds of the equator, to the very top of the Andes in the Caribbean, in Colombia, they endured dust storms, thundering gales, icy mountaintops, and skin-searing heat, and tested the limits of their physical and mental strength as they lived wild month after month, camping under galaxies of diamond stars. And it is my great pleasure to welcome Michael and Paula tonight. And welcome, Michael and Paula, and we look forward to some excerpts from your what looks to be a very interesting book, which I should add, by the way, we have 3 copies of which we have 3 copies for prizes tonight. So, Michael and Paula, welcome, and we look forward to learning from you tonight.
Thank you very much,
Hi, Justin. Thank you, and good evening to everyone out there that's watching.
Yeah, thank you. Difficult to know after where to go after an introduction like that, but we'll start.
Hey, Paula and Michael, did you get my prompt to share your screen? We can't see it yet. There it is. Thank you. Take it away.
So the Andes are in fact the greatest mountain chain on Earth, certainly as far as bird life is concerned. And therefore, in 2014, we decided to go and find out for ourselves. We'd never before that time been to South America, but in 2014, we decided to basically pack up everything we had and head off. We were going for a short time.
Yeah, just a year.
Just a year, and off we went. We put our very, very, very small camper van into a container in London and shipped it across to South America, to Uruguay. And several months later, we turned up in Montevideo, picked it up, and off we went.
But, well, why did we go to South America?
Well, why did we?
Well, you can look at this map and it'll tell you. The deeper the red means more biodiversity. And you can see the concentration over in that fantastic continent of South America. If you love nature, South America is the continent you've got to go to.
Yeah, there's really no other continent that even compares to South America in terms of biodiversity. And what we were going to do, we were going to promote bird conservation.
Which we were going to do by making films.
And with a lot of those films, we were working with BirdLife International partners. And of course, we were going to travel the greatest mountain chain on Earth. Easy to say all of that and going for a year.
Yeah, we thought we could do top to bottom in a year. But, well, actually, as Justin has already told you, it took us more like 4 years.
4 years. This map that you can see actually plots where we went. We had a satellite navigation system with us, which tracked everywhere that we went when we activated it. And you'll see that we really didn't spend hardly any time, only a week or so in Brazil.
Mainly because they speak Portuguese there.
And there were lots of other places to go.
And we concentrated on the length of the Andes.
Yeah, that was very much where we were going. So a little bit about the Andes and the huge importance of that mountain chain upon bird life. Can't go into all of the details by any means this evening. But if we go down to Patagonia, for instance, and you went onto the western coast,
on the Chilean side.
On the Chilean side of the Andes, it is thickly forested, like this picture. Whereas if you go on east of the Andes,
on the Argentinian side,
then it is hugely windy, dry, quite
flat steppes, plain, arid, very windy.
Completely different worlds either side of a mountain chain. So for instance, going back to the west, in Chile, southern beech forests stretch for probably nearly 1,000 miles. There is an area of temperate rainforest, very much like British Columbia, down there as well. In fact, there are only 3 temperate rainforests in the world, and that is British Columbia,
Tasmania,
and Chile. And they have some super birds, things like the Magellanic woodpecker, one of the biggest woodpeckers in the world, and the slender-billed parrot. Whereas if you just hopped over the mountains, which
they've got their own special endemics there.
Absolutely.
And you've got the red-backed hawk, black-faced ibis, the tawny-throated dotterel, that we saw some little chicks of those, they were absolutely gorgeous, and the chocolate-vented tyrant.
And they're just a selection of the birds we saw. But there was one particular bird that we were requested to go and make a film about if we could.
And this bird is called the hooded grebe. It's critically endangered. There's only about 700, 800 of them left in the world. And not surprisingly, they live in the most inhospitable places. They breed on the tops of these plateaus in the very bottom of Patagonia.
Yeah, there are 3 plateaus. So first of all, we had to get up onto that plateau. Then we had to search for the birds.
Not easy.
Almost impossible. And then we had to stay there throughout the breeding season and try and film their fantastic, hitherto unfilmed
in its entirety
courtship behaviour.
And the bird really dances the tango. And if you want to see any of the films that we made when we were in South America, we've got a YouTube channel called The Condor's Feather, and it sort of goes in partnership with the book. And you can see our film there that's called Tango in the Wind, which is the story of the hooded grebe.
Yeah. And of course, whilst you're in country, anywhere near the Andes, the one bird that you're always looking out for that's circling high above you in the heavens is in fact the Andean condor, one of the biggest flying birds in the world. And this bird, during the years that we spent there, became our favorite. It became very important to us in lots of ways.
We didn't know if we were following it or it was following us.
I think they were following us.
Do you think?
Yeah. In fact, we were working many times with indigenous peoples. And of course, the condor is super important to them. It's a sacred bird.
But let's go a bit further north.
Yeah, we have to move further north. And of course, the mountain chain, the Andes, is a young mountain chain in geological sense of the word. And therefore, it is still active. And there are a line of volcanoes, many active volcanoes. Every few years, there is a volcanic eruption somewhere or other along the mountain chain. And of course, let's get up into Peru, a lot further north. Whereas in fact,
this is really strange, really, here, because the countryside changes over. Now you've got the dry deserts on the west, like the Atacama Desert, and on the east you've got these magnificent forested slopes that are leading down to the Amazon.
Yeah, birds like the cock of the rock is a speciality there. But there was one bird that we really wanted to see, but there were many birds that we wanted to see, but we went out of our way to find this bird. We love seabirds in particular. We've done most of our bird watching as youngsters in the United Kingdom, famous for seabirds. And there was one seabird in particular, a tern, that we wanted to see. So we drove deep into the Atacama Desert. In fact, this is where we camped. It was a bit of a difficult campsite. We had to sort of nestle in between all of the other people that were
very crowded.
Very crowded indeed. And we stayed there for about a week, which was about as long as our water supply could last us. And we got wonderful photographs and memories of the Inca tern. This was the bird that we really most wanted to see.
So elegant.
So elegant. Difficult bird to find, breeds on sheer cliffs directly.
Oh, you nearly died, didn't you?
Well, I didn't die because I am here.
It says it here in the book.
But I am here.
So you didn't die?
I didn't die. I didn't die. No. But in fact, we spent several weeks there, no, several months, traveling back down on the eastern side of the Andes, now over again the Andes into the Amazon basin. But let's move further north,
right to the top,
to probably the country that next to Argentina, Colombia was the country that we spent probably most time in. And this is where the Andes becomes very special. And people often wonder why Colombia is so good for birds, because it is amazing. And that is because the Andes itself splits into 3 giant cordilleras, split by 2 huge valleys, the valley of the Cauca
and the
Magdalena rivers that run down them. So moving from the west to the east or vice versa, you have to go up and down. It's like going up and down the Andes 3 times.
Very difficult journey.
Of course, on the Pacific coast, The mountains are thickly forested. So half the country is mountainous and forested. The other half of Colombia, the eastern side,
Flat steppe.
flat and flooded, completely
Like a
inundated
savannah.
for 6 months of the year. (1,943 species approximately are to be
They
found.
keep finding new ones. don't they?
Every year or two, there's a new one discovered. But Colombia is incredible, absolutely incredible, particularly the Andes, particularly the forested parts of the Andes, where the vast majority.
Each slope has got its own special birds,
Yes,
endemic birds.
3 cordilleras, 6 different slopes, 6 different entirely forested habitats.
Let alone all the other habitats.
Yeah, indeed.
We
Now,
were working with BirdLife International a lot of the time, making films for them, totally on a pro bono basis. We were just doing it for the love of birds, and we were looked after very well, weren't we?
as you can see, they looked after us. You don't always have to have that for Colombia. Now, there are 2 families of birds that, to us, resonate mostly with Colombia, and this is probably why most bird watchers want to go. The tanagers.
Beautiful, so many tanagers.
Dozens and dozens of species.
Every colour of the rainbow.
And of course, hummingbirds. And I've just shown you one hummingbird here, which was a beautiful one that we spent a little bit of time with. But there's another bird, very close to all of our hearts, the Canada warbler, of course, that's been declining for quite a few years. And
hang on. What's that cup of coffee doing in the middle of the picture?
well,
You got that in by mistake?
no, it's not a mistake, because coffee and Canada warblers goes very much together, because coffee is grown intensively in the area where the Canada warblers spend half of their year.
And
So
do they like the coffee?
No, they don't like the coffee, but the coffee is grown in the trees that the Canada warblers like, and thereby hangs a huge conservation tail. Which we can't get into, but the book does a little bit. But it's a beautiful bird. But it's as much a Colombian bird as it is called a Canadian bird. The other bird that we spent a lot of time
It's in the eastern half
filming
of Colombia.
in an area called the Llanos.
This flooded savanna, it's a seasonally flooded savanna. So half the year you're up to your neck in water, and the other half of the year it's dry as a bone.
Completely dry. And what lives there? But
On these special grasslands that are looked after by these special guys, the llaneros, who have a very traditional way of ranching.
yeah, I mean, if you thought that the real cowboys were in California and
Texas
and Mexico,
Forget
you're wrong. The real cowboys are in the Llanos of Colombia, and in their areas is a very important grassland bird called the buff-breasted sandpiper, another Canadian bird and a North American bird, vastly in decline. One of the reasons is that its wintering grounds are disappearing, and we spent quite a bit of time searching for this bird, filming it, speaking to the grassland, the owners of the grasslands, and trying to make a training film for the farmers and the ranchers.
So like I said, if you want to see any of our films, our YouTube channel is called The Condor's Feather. So you can have a look for, what was this film called? Searching for Buffy.
Searching for Buffy, the buff-breasted sandpiper. Right up at the north of Colombia, almost overlooking the Caribbean Sea, there's an isolated area of mountains called the Santa Marta Mountains. And these actually are not part of the Andes at all.
Completely different.
They're completely different. Geologically, they are millions and millions of years older. And that makes them even more important.
So this is a really important area to go to if you want to tick off loads and loads of endemics.
Yeah, some very special birds. And we were up there, and would you believe one of the birds that we most wanted to see was
The Caribbean flamingo.
The Caribbean flamingo. We'd done a lot of work on flamingos.
We really wanted to see this.
And we like flamingos.
We like big pink birds.
So we go looking for flamingos, but sometimes looking for flamingos does get you into a bit of a mess.
It does, can't it? Yes. Oh dear. We decided we'd like to drive into the sea
Yeah, so
as the tide was coming in. So that was a bit scary, wasn't it?
yeah, a bit scary and a bit stupid. But shortly after that, we left.
So
We went.
really, South America, fantastic place to go to. If you love traveling, it is an amazing place. Read all about it in our book. Have a look at our films on our YouTube channel. And enjoy.
And enjoy it. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Michael and Paula. It was fascinating. A very quick, I'm sure that we would call that a digest. It's just like such a
we
huge
can talk for longer than this,
yes, you did. I mean, it's a huge geographic area, tons of biodiversity. I love the way that the east slope and west slope were different. You know, in the southern part of the Andes versus the middle to northern part. You know, rainy on this side, dry on this side, and vice versa. The opposite. Amazing, amazing. Looks like an amazing adventure, and we're certainly all looking forward to reading the book. In fact, we do have some, as I said, 3 copies here, so stay through to the end for the opportunity to win one of these. And fascinating look, and I love that you brought up Colombia, because in fact, Colombia and the Andes, I'm going to be talking about those later this evening. So thanks so much for that.
Thank you.
And have a good night. Stick with us though till the end. Thank you. Great. So I am just going to good evening to our next speaker, who is Graham. Graham Sorenson is going to be talking tonight on the Bay of Fundy and Grand Manan. And speaking of how we meet people in interesting or different ways, I met Paula and Michael Webster while leading a bird walk. These days, in the times of social media, it's possible to meet people living in very different parts of the world or of the country through social media such as Instagram and Twitter. And that is how I came to be acquainted with our next speaker, Graham Sorenson. Graham grew up in Vermont in the United States, and he spent lots of time in nature, continuing to develop his interests and love for the natural world through his undergraduate studies, years as a field biologist, and a master's degree at the University of Windsor in Ontario. And his passion for birds took off during his undergraduate studies when he was a field research assistant on Kent Island, which is just south of Grand Manan Island, which he's going to touch on this evening. And after years of working as a bird biologist throughout Canada, Graham recently returned to New Brunswick as the Aerial Insectivore Conservation Coordinator with Birds Canada. Graham loves to travel, both locally and internationally, most recently to Costa Rica, Colombia, and on birding trips in the United States. He's an avid hiker and backpacker, and he's always spending his free time birding and just exploring, watching for mammals, and learning about plants. And recently, Graham joined us as an assistant or apprentice leader on our Bay of Fundy and Grand Manan tour that took place in the middle of August. Graham comes to us with particular interests in seabirds and shorebirds. And tonight, he's going to be telling us more about what makes the Bay of Fundy and Grand Manan a really special part of the world to consider. Take it away, Graham, and welcome.
Thanks a lot. Thanks so much, Justin. You can hear and see me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. Great. Well, I'm really excited to be here tonight and to be able to share some photos and highlights from the Bay of Fundy and Grand Manan, and hopefully get people excited about visiting this special place in 8 minutes. So I'll just start by orienting everyone to where this amazing place is. So the Bay of Fundy is the large tidal basin that's sandwiched between New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. And from end to end, it's over 250 kilometers long. And so across this area includes a huge variety of ecozones and habitats. And every 12 hours in this giant basin, over 100 billion tons of water flow through the bay in and out as the tides come and go. More flow than all of the world's freshwater rivers collectively flowing at a moment. So an incredible amount of water passing back and forth in this bay. And the incredible tides in the bay are actually the reason that the Bay of Fundy is one of the 7 natural wonders of North America. And one of the places that's often thought of when you picture the Bay of Fundy is this upper end of the bay where there's the world's largest tides and giant mud flats. And in parts of those, rising up out of those mud flats are rock formations that are slowly eroding away. So this is Hopewell Rocks that's pictured here, where at low tide you can walk on the ocean floor amongst these giant eroding island rock formations. And then at high tide, much of these formations disappear and is underwater, under 14-meter tides. And these highly tidal mudflats provide an extremely valuable stopover location for migrating semi-palmated sandpipers and other shorebird species. And there's several key locations in this northern part of the bay that host up to 250,000 sandpipers at a time during the months of July and August each year. And the majority of the global population of semi-palmated sandpipers pass through the region. So one place that visitors can go to enjoy this spectacle, and that we go on the Bay of Fundy tour with Quest, is Johnson's Mills Shorebird Reserves. This is a photo I took this past summer of a small chunk of this beach that was just filled with semi-palmated sandpipers and a mix of other species. And after spending a few weeks fattening up on mud shrimp and biofilm and other foods, the sandpipers take off from this area and fly directly to South America. So a nonstop flight of over 3,000 kilometers. So I'll just share a really brief video here, if it'll work, of a flock of these sandpipers. And so as this huge group of sandpipers is roosting on the beach or actively feeding, predators, especially peregrine falcons, will try their luck at a meal. And so when a peregrine falcon goes up after a huge flock of shorebirds like this, you get these incredible murmurations as the birds split and fly and move to try to get away from the peregrine falcon. All right, and then as one leaves the upper part of the Bay of Fundy and travels kind of southwest towards the mouth of the Bay of Fundy, you leave behind the expansive mudflats for these steep rocky shorelines. This area has slightly smaller tides in terms of depth, but it's still incredibly powerful. So as you get out to the mouth of the bay, all of that water from higher up is flowing in and out every 12 hours. And you also get a shift in the wildlife highlights that you can see. And sitting in the mouth of the Bay of Fundy is this spectacular little island called Grand Manan. It's an incredibly great place to explore a rugged coastline, venture out from there for seabirds and whales, and find diverse plants and birds in the boreal forest on the island. It's also a great place to eat seafood. So the rocky islands and some of the coastline in this part of the Bay of Fundy provides the habitat for a diversity of seabirds to breed. So pictured here are Atlantic puffins, razorbills, and Arctic tern. And then there's other species like common murre that are quite common. And all of these seabirds are breeding on some of these small rocky islands, including the island of Machias Seal Island, which is a lighthouse and research station south of Grand Manan out in the open ocean at the mouth of the Bay of Fundy. And so close views of all of these amazing birds as they're carrying food back to their chicks are a highlight of the tour, especially puffins. A lot of people are really excited to get these close views of Atlantic puffins. And even when you're far from these breeding islands, these species can be seen flying back and forth to good feeding areas or swimming around, especially in August, with their young. And hidden amongst the smaller islands in this area are Leach's storm petrels. And each pair of these storm petrels are raising a single chick in their underground burrow. Only researchers are able to visit these colonies, but while we're out on whale and seabird watching trips from Grand Manan, you can keep an eye out for sightings of Leach's storm petrel that are foraging and feeding in the Bay of Fundy. I had to share these couple images of adorable Leach's storm petrel chicks and the cool habitat they breed in because my personal love of this area and the beginning of my birding and bird research journey, as Justin mentioned, started about a decade ago when I worked on a small island off of Grand Manan, studying Leach's storm petrel populations. And then the final kind of region of the Bay of Fundy to explore for for wildlife is the deeper offshore waters that are out in the middle of the mouth of the bay. And so here you have rushing tides coming in and out, much deeper waters, and then an ocean floor with contours that create productive and rich waters where there's upwellings. And this provides a ton of food for whales and seabirds to feed. So humpback whales are abundant. Dolphins and porpoises move around in large pods throughout this area. And there's other whale species that are present and can be found, like minke and fin, and a huge diversity of seabirds is possible. So some of the most common seabirds, besides the ones I've already mentioned breeding in the area, are great shearwaters and northern gannets. So getting close sightings of these from the whale watching boats is common and often seen congregating in large numbers near where whales are feeding. And then there's other really cool seabirds like sooty and Corey's shearwater, South Polar skua, and other storm petrels. Wilson's storm petrel is a very common bird to see out on the water. And while you're out looking for whales and seabirds, there's a whole diversity of other cool species out there. Mola mola, we saw quite a few of this past summer. So this is the heaviest bony fish with adults weighing between 500 and 4,000 pounds. And we got some really cool close views of these giant fish from the boat. There's gray seals and harbor seals in many of the areas you're going. We saw several pods of Atlantic white-sided dolphin right near the boat, jumping and displaying their really cool patterning and colors for us. And huge flocks of species like phalarope, which is a pelagic species that kind of straddles the definitions of shorebird and seabird. It's a really fun one to see. And then as you're walking the trails and exploring the coastline in Grand Manan and in all of these areas, there's a diversity of flowers and pollinators to see in August. So monarch butterflies are common to see on grassy headlands, where you can also be seeing porpoises and shearwaters flying by. And so monarchs are just beginning their migration south at that time of the year. There's late summer wildflowers, including fireweed, sometimes in large fields, which are an amazing thing to see. And then the scenery along the coasts is just remarkable throughout the Bay of Fundy. So rock formations like the hole in the wall pictured here, classic lighthouse on headlands like Swallowtail Lighthouse, these cool old lighthouses on islands off the coast. This is Gannet Rock that's pictured in the top right. And then places that are used by fishermen and people harvesting too. So Dark Harbor pictured here, where dulse is harvested, and fishing weirs throughout the coast. So a beautiful scenery to be looking for wildlife at the same time. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Graham, for that digest view. I'm sure there's so much more to see there. You're giving us just a little taster there of what looks like a fascinating thing. And I'm sure the spectacle of the shimmering almost of those murmurations, I mean, you're getting a little bit of it there in the video, but just probably to be there and see that whole thing evolving in front of you. And in a way, I guess we can't really predict which way it's going to go, this way or that way, is part of the excitement of just that evolving mass.
It sure is very exciting.
Interesting. And so I should take the opportunity to mention that Graham, as I mentioned, Graham was a co-leader on this year's trip. Graham will be leading our next scheduled departure for the Bay of Fundy and Grand Manan, August 10th to the 16th in 2024. So if you want to have a short, really interesting trip with a highly qualified quest leader. In fact, I think Graham's house overlooks the Bay of Fundy. You can't find someone for whom the Bay of Fundy is closer to his heart than Graham. Join Graham and just watch for details on that trip. In fact, they're already posted on our website. So thank you so much, Graham. And now it is time that I will present my talk, this next talk, which is of course introducing Zambia, the best safari destination no one has been to. About a year ago, I had an opportunity to visit the country called Zambia on a familiarization tour. It is a place I, of course, had never been to previously. I've been to a couple of different places in Africa, South Africa, Namibia, and the Gambia and Senegal previously, but never to the Zambia, to Zambia. And it was a country that has intrigued me for a long time, because I've heard sort of just murmurs about this country. And it's a country that I thought in my mind was somewhat like countries of East Africa, like Tanzania and Kenya, that perhaps some of you have visited in the past, perhaps for your first ever safari. But it was a country that intrigued me because I knew so little about it. And I'll tell you a little bit more about Zambia and about my trip and what I think really makes Zambia an interesting location. To give you an orientation here, this is Africa here at center, and the country in green is Zambia, located just south of the middle and slightly east of center. Probably in my mind, I imagine sharing some traits with Southern Africa, South Africa, and also with East Africa. It is adjoining Tanzania to the northeast. But I wasn't really sure what made it special, what defined it. But studying Zambia a little bit in advance and then eventually seeing it, I got to see really what makes it unique. Zambia here, as you can see, this sort of almost C-shaped country here. And what I have, the name Zambia, of course, is coming from the largest river, which is sort of running through it and along it, which is called the Zambezi River, which is here, which empties out on the Indian Ocean on the east side of Africa. And so Zambia is largely defined by the river, not only because of its borders, but also because it's the fourth largest river in Africa. So it's a very large river. You can imagine it carries a lot of water. And of course, it's maybe a platitude to say that water is important. Large parts of Africa get seasonal rain, so they get rains through part of the year and they're dry the rest of the year. And going to a place like Zambia, that becomes quite evident if you're visiting in the dry season. This is a view, most of the photos in this presentation are mine, that Zambia, let's say in October, is a dry land, and the land sort of looks desiccated. So the fact that there is water is surely important to the wildlife that's there. You can even see from this image here, this little island in the river down here has a number of trees on it that are all really green because they have access to the water of the river there. And in large part, this area looks dry. Now, of course, this area will change in the rainy season. But in the meantime, that water is important. As I said, for wildlife, you know, wildlife goes to water and congregates near water during times of drought. But more than just water as a source of sustenance, in Zambia, with this large river here, the Zambezi, and a number of also quite large tributaries, water becomes important just as a physical presence in terms of a barrier. It's a barrier to movement for wildlife that walks. So even in an image like this, which is at the height of the dry season, there's still quite a bit of water. So physically, it's a defining presence in the landscape. And even the small rivers that are tributaries, even though they may lose most of their surface area of water at the height of the dry season, they're still important because they expose areas like these, these large sand islands that are usually underwater, deposited by the floodwaters at the height of the rainy season. And as I would come to learn also from my visit, that even completely dry riverbeds have their own importance. And it's just the density and the presence of all these large water bodies that makes Zambia interesting. So in fact, this is just a little clip of flying over one of these tributaries. So the water is there. It's a physical barrier. It's a source of sustenance for the wildlife. Obviously important. I talked about Zambia as a safari destination, and in fact, it is a safari destination. Now, you might have the notion of safaris being, going in a vehicle, in a small vehicle, looking around for wildlife. And yes, that is something that you can do in Zambia. A little bit different than perhaps East Africa. If you've been to East Africa, where you have enclosed vehicles with a pop-up top, possibly because there's so much wildlife that might like to jump on you or jump onto the vehicle, you need that extra protection. In Zambia, you don't typically need that. You can drive in sort of open vehicles like this and explore through a number of excellent national parks and reserves. And but the difference here, not only is that water, but also the ability to enjoy wildlife almost in peace and quiet, with very few other people around, and with these just large, vast open spaces. So while East Africa has these huge herds of wildebeest, which do this giant migration annually, some of you have seen that migration yourselves. Tanzania, or rather Zambia, doesn't have this huge abundance of wildlife ever in one location. It's spread out, but the spaces are just so much larger, and you have the chance to explore them and take your time and really get an intimate feel for wildlife. So African elephants, of course, are found throughout Africa, a large swath of Africa. Zambia has a lot of elephants. And I've seen elephants before in South Africa and Namibia, but I don't think I've ever had a chance to sort of drive along an elephant that's quite oblivious to our presence, or just indifferent, and really study and just look at its amazing skin. The skin on the body looks like this, but I've never had a chance to look at the top of the snout of an elephant and see that the shapes of the skin, they look like little polyps, almost like on a sea anemone arms, or the underside of a starfish. So you have this proximity, but the things you could do in Zambia are also, in terms of just viewing wildlife, they're different. Zambia is the home of what we call the walking safari. So you could drive around in vehicles and view wildlife that way, but the walking safari was pioneered in Zambia. You have a chance with an armed guard from whichever national park you're in to walk on the ground and experience the African bush in a way that you don't typically get to do in most other parts of Africa, or only in a very, very limited way. So whereas being in a vehicle, you can't get out and see things up close, you can do that in Zambia and go under those trees that the elephants are feeding on or feeding under, and walk up to one of those rivers and have a closer look at what's in there. And for example, you can walk up to the edge of the bank. In this case, this is the South Luangwa River. I'll tell you about it in a moment. And just watch elephants dozing in the river, basking. Look at those huge sediment flats that are behind those hippopotamus. So you have a chance to walk. And of course, I said you're with an armed guard, but having that chance to walk on the ground lets you see what animals are actually doing. Elephants using the tusks to scraping the tusks against trees. There was this wonderful tree which was blooming. This is in the month of October, at the end of the dry season, and it had the most intoxicating fragrance. And I felt I needed to get on the ground and have a closer look at what it was. It's a legume in the pea family, but just to be able to touch things and see things up close, pick up things off the ground, such as this pod of the winter thorn acacia, and look at something that the elephants were eating, but have the chance to actually see it. And even do a little bit of tracking, seeing tracks, touching tracks of a lion or a leopard. I think this was a lion here, and even anticipating what we might see around the bend. We had a lot of hoof marks on the ground here, and eventually came upon a large herd of Cape buffalo, one of Africa's big five, considered a highly dangerous animal, but if you keep a respectful distance, you can watch them, and they're fairly indifferent. Mostly from Cape buffalo, you get stares, and they're all kind of staring at you, looking at you, although they have nothing really to fear from us, but they're there. And so you have a chance to get a closer experience of the wildlife. And there's another experience you can do in Zambia, which I loved, especially as a Canadian. I never thought my skills as a canoeist in Canada that I've developed, especially in Algonquin Park, could find use in Zambia. And Zambia is a great place for the canoe safari. You don't have to paddle, but if you have skills, that's great. And in fact, because I actually had paddling skills, I was put in charge of steering. I was sort of promoted to a guide role to steer a canoe that someone else was in. And you can see what I'm looking at there in the background. And this lets you get really down low at the level of wildlife. Water being so important, a lot of the wildlife is coming down to the water, and so you can cruise along, watching elephants. Tons of bird life, of course, right along the water. Many different shorebirds and waders, all sorts of other birds flying by, and it's really impressive. You feel the size of an elephant when you're below its eye level when you're down there. And they're really, they watch us, but they're really mainly indifferent to us, but quite an impressive sight nonetheless. And hippos will tend to be below eye level for us because they're actually submerged in the water, and they watch us curiously from the distance. And we keep a good distance from them because they are considered a dangerous animal. But you can feel the, shall I say, vitality of the hippos when you're at their level in the river. So quite an impressive sight and experience indeed. And like any place, I mean, we can never predict what sorts of encounters we're going to have, but you can have fantastic encounters in these quieter spaces that you find in Zambia in these national parks. You will eventually stumble upon something interesting. We had this female lioness who walked along the road between our two vehicles facing each other and ignored us, walked right in front of us, stopped for a moment, looked very pointedly in the distance, and then kept walking, and then went on to start calling at something. And you might see this sort of movement she does with her jaw, moving it this way a little bit. And she's in fact, you can see in a moment what's going to happen. Here, calling her young out of hiding. She's put her young in hiding. They've been obedient, and well, she's been out, and she's come back to greet them. And so, pretty incredible sightings that you can get. You can get these in other places in Africa, of course, but here you have that sense of tranquility and intimacy. And then all the young come out there, and mother snuggles with them. And look, that last straggler came out of nowhere, running quickly for mom, and of course, young lions are up to no good, sitting around, perhaps looking innocuous, but often really pestering each other. We have many opportunities for elephants. This was a young bull just starting to get his tusks, who was feeding in one of those dry oxbows that floods from river water in the rainy season, and it drains, and it becomes a place where a lot of wildlife comes to feed, including elephants, on the grass that grows in those extinct river bends. And here he encounters us, maybe somewhat larger than him, in our vehicle, and perhaps he's just showing us what he thinks of us, but he sort of does this little mock charge at us, doesn't know quite what to make of us, and carries on. And just incredible sights. I've never imagined giraffes crossing a river before. So confident are they that their legs reach the bottom. Is it through experience or what? I cannot tell you, but something I never thought I would see. This is an endemic subspecies of giraffe, the thorny-croft giraffe, found in one of the national parks in South Wongwa that we visit. Bird life in Africa, I cannot say enough about bird life in Africa. Stunning, striking. Even if you're not a keen birder, you just can't help but be impressed. And bird life, like wading birds that eat fish, concentrate on water towards the end of the dry season when water is limited. Fish have few places to hide. So wonderful waders, wonderful songbirds in Africa. Many colored and very, very attractive birds. Many birds of prey in Africa of different sorts, such as this African harrier hawk. You've probably seen these frightening looking marabou stork before on documentaries, a scavenging bird that feeds on carcasses and other things. Hornbills, and my favorite are the bee eaters. And the southern carmine bee eater, I think one of the most beautiful birds in the world, finds a stronghold here in Zambia, and notably in the second national park that I visited, South Longwood National Park, where they breed in colonies in burrows that they make in the banks of the rivers when the rivers are low at the height of the dry season. So they make these burrows in the bank, and you can see here, I'll show you quickly, the colony of these birds. They're flying in and out of this bank, and they're slightly agitated, and I didn't realize, so their holes are here in the bank over here in a dense array. It's hard to see from this angle, but they're upset because there's something right down here. Fascinating to me, when I took a closer look, what were they upset about? A Nile monitor lizard was crawling along the base of their colony, perhaps trying to get into one of their nest burrows. Their eggs and young of those bee eaters were deep in a burrow in the bank of this river, but perhaps the monitor lizard thought it would have a chance. So beautiful birds in Africa. I can't say enough. And we have a chance, very good chance, to go up to one of these colonies when you go there. If you haven't guessed, I am working up to a tour that I'm going to propose to Zambia. The lodges in Zambia are ideally situated. Many of them are located by water. And this is one of the lodges I visited, which is Isla, the Safari Lodge, located along the Kafue River in Kafue National Park. You see those individual lodges that you have there situated by the river, which is the lifeblood of this area, especially in the dry season, with beautiful accommodations both inside and out. And in fact, many of the accommodations in Zambia that I found were well, they were always beautifully situated. Great views, but also integrated well into the environment. So you could be literally looking at elephants or whatever might be right from the lodge or from your porch of your own private accommodation. So elephants could be there. One morning I woke up to find a hippopotamus, two of them, hippopotami, I guess you would say, grazing on fresh grass right in front of my lodge. I had to wait a little while for them to clear out of the way. Eventually I did get to breakfast though, and they're quite indifferent to our presence. Now we do have a tour. I'm working up to it to Zambia, our inaugural group tour to Zambia. It is running October 31st to November 11th, 2023, and it will be led by this gentleman here, Chris Early, a long-standing Quest Nature Tours leader who has led many of our trips to Africa, in Kenya, Tanzania, Namibia, South Africa, and I think those are all the countries, yes. Anyways, he's a veteran Quest leader who will be well positioned to help you enjoy Zambia if you'd like to discover it. I encourage you to do so. And the trip that we're proposing for next year looks a little bit like this. We start and end in the capital of Lusaka. We visit 3 prime national parks. First, Kafue National Park, here to the left, which is the oldest national park in Zambia, founded in 1950. Fantastic introduction to the African bush. Then we will fly over to South Longwood National Park on the South Longwood River. Both Kafue River and South Longwood are tributaries of the Zambezi River. That's another fantastic national park where we could do walking safaris in addition to drives. And then we end in the lower Zambezi National Park on the largest river, most impressive in size, and then we return to Lusaka. So really a 12-day trip. Our timing, end of October into November, is at the edge of the rainy season. Even before rains actually start, the leaves are starting to flush in the trees, and it's beautiful. I can't say enough. The woodlands are beautiful. You have savannas and a really interesting mixture of habitats in the different parks that we visit. And of course, the Zambezi River, if I didn't mention it, is the river that creates, or the river that falls over a certain escarpment at a location called Victoria Falls. So if you go to Zambia, you have a chance to visit Victoria Falls. They're not at their most impressive because it's still at the end of the dry season, but they're incredibly long and situated in this wonderful gorge, and a wonderful place to see, a wonderful way to start off a trip to Zambia. You can get to Victoria Falls easily and then join us in Lusaka for the main trip. And if you so wish, I'll play you a quick clip here of the inside of Victoria Falls, double rainbows. And the dry season, because the water is not so high, not torrential to the degree it can be, still beautiful. you have a chance also to perch on the edge of Victoria Falls, as I did here. It's not as dangerous as it looks, I promise you that. So Zambia in a bite, a fantastic place to see classic African wildlife and see it very well in an intimate setting. The mammals, bird life, beautiful, impressive, mouth-watering really. It's really eye candy for the soul, I think. Just classic African scenes. There's always something evolving and impressive, and really to appreciate the importance of water physically and just the impact it has on everything in many different ways, and the chance to really get a front seat view to water in Africa, and to explore, perhaps employ some of the skills you have already in a different continent and get a chance for that intimate experience of Africa in different ways. So I'd like to thank you for joining me on this quick introduction, sneak peek to Zambia. If you follow our e-news, our Quest Nature Tours e-news, watch for more details on our inaugural group trip to Zambia next Tuesday. So just watch your inbox for that, coming from myself, Justin, at Quest Nature Tours. So thank you very much. And now I would like to move on to a quick update from our partners at Ontario Nature, and I'm expecting our guest James to be joining us in a moment. James Kamstra is on the board of directors of Ontario Nature being our preeminent nature conservation organization in Ontario, of course, with 30,000 members. We've long worked with Ontario Nature as a supporter. We're proud to say we support Ontario Nature and also to run tours for Ontario Nature. James is here to give us some updates, some interesting updates on the work of Ontario Nature. And hang tight, because there's a tour that we're going to talk about. Aren't we, James? Welcome, James.
Yes, thank you, Justin. Thank you. That was quite a presentation. All those presentations have really impressed me. Well, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Ontario Nature. I'm sure many of the people who have traveled with Quest are quite familiar with the organization. It's an NGO really concerned about wild places and wildlife in the province of Ontario. And maybe next slide. Yeah, so Ontario Nature, they have quite a number of different campaigns and programs going on. Wetlands is just one of the things that they're doing, really promoting the protection of wetlands. There's the boreal forest is another one. Really looking at the whole province, because we do have a big province here, huge diversity, but there's a lot of things going on which are threatening some of that diversity. And Ontario Nature is really in the forefront of trying to make sure that we continue on with the environment we have. And they really have a staff. I'm not paid staff, I'm just on the board, but I am so impressed with the members on the board, the director, and there are just so many different programs that are going on. Next. So as you know, there's some things going on in Ontario which are threatening a lot of these things, and Ontario Nature has been kind of at the forefront of really looking at some of the direction that the provincial government has been taking, things like the minister zoning orders, which are threatening some of the wetlands, and then sometimes activating the membership to make sure there's kind of a dual role. There's the protection, but there's also the social aspect of letting people know what's happening out there, and in some cases motivating people to do things to make sure that we continue on with a great province of Ontario with all its nature. Next. So one of the big things, of course, is the young people. And so Ontario Nature has done a really great job. We have a youth summit every year where we get a couple hundred students from high school or early university age, bring them together, introduce them to a lot of the environmental concepts. And a lot of this has been going on for a number of years. A lot of these young people have gone on to really become educators in themselves. Really important to reach out to this branch. And also there's a lot of new Canadians here, people from different backgrounds. And so really important that they get exposed to nature as well. They have this birding hike program specifically for youth. There's one that's been going on in Toronto, another one that's been going up in the Thunder Bay area. So really trying to reach out on the provincial level. Next. And one of the really interesting things that Ontario Nature has been doing is their nature reserve program. So there's 27 different reserves across really southern Ontario, not in the north, but extending from a whole diversity of places. Well, the Gananoque Nature Reserve was just a couple of years ago. There was this property came up. It was close to the Lost Bay Nature Reserve in the Frontenac axis, so a really diverse area, has a lot of reptiles and some great wetlands. And so they had a fundraising campaign, and the membership was very responsive and coming up the money in a very short time, so they were able to secure that land. And then another one is Stone Road Alvar, which is on Pelee Island, the most southern piece of Canada. And this is a very significant kind of habitat. It's like a savanna alvar, and being so far south, there's a lot of plants and animals there that are nowhere else in the country. But in these things, they require a certain amount of management. And one of the ways to keep the diversity in place, like the Stone Road Alvar, is every once in a while they have to do controlled burns to arrest the succession. So here's a shot of 2 years ago. They did actually light part of the alvar on fire to make sure that we keep this open habitat. A lot of the wildflowers, for example, are dependent on the open conditions. All right. And so the staff are out there doing research on some of the different, doing inventories. That picture you just flew by shows them with a fox snake. You're rushing a bit too fast from there. And then the Sydenham Nature, yeah, okay, here we are on Pelee Island. They've got a fox snake, there's blue racers there, and they were doing some marking to document them there. Now the Sydenham Nature Reserve, it's not too well known perhaps, but it's a river that flows into Lake St. Clair near Wallaceburg, and Ontario Nature purchased this reserve several years ago. I think the first one was about 10 years ago, and just a year ago, another parcel came up right next to it. So they bought this parcel, very high diversity. And one of the things the Sydenham River is really known for are the mollusks. There are more species of mollusks in the Sydenham River than any other river in Canada. And these mollusks are very under threat. A lot of them are endangered species. There's a real issue with the zebra mussels. Because they've moved into like Lake Erie, most of the rare mussels that used to be in Lake Erie are no longer there, but they're still in the Sydenham River. So the reserve has a really important function. And another thing that they're doing there, part of that reserve, the new land that they bought, is farmland that is in the process of being naturalized. And so this coming weekend and the next weekend, we have a big tree campaign. A lot of volunteers are coming out to plant trees there. And if you are interested, you can participate. Just check the website, and you too could help putting some of the native species, returning some of that nice Carolinian forest to this really threatened part of Ontario. Next. And then Ontario Nature does have an affiliation with Quest, so we have run tours together in the past, and we have this trip coming up to Colombia. Now, you heard this beautiful presentation by Michael Webster. So he told you a little bit about some of what's there in Colombia. So, and the tour that we have, first of all, Ontario Nature offered another tour, which is being led by the director, Carolyn Schultz. And it was so popular, it filled up in a short time. So they asked me if I would lead another trip there. And here's the dates that you see here. And this tour is going to go to the central part of Colombia. You heard about the different ranges. Well, it's going to go into the eastern range of the Andes and part of the Magdalena Valley. Maybe if you show me the next slide. Colombia, as Michael mentioned, is the most diverse country in the world for birds, but it's also a really great country for a lot of other biodiversity. And so while the tour will look at birds to a very large extent, we also go out, look at butterflies. I know quite a bit of butterflies. We'll go out at night looking for frogs. There's all these arrow poison frogs that are endemic to Colombia. So it's really a nature tour that's going to bring in or look at a lot of the diversity that's there. It's also just amazing for plants, and in the Andes, when you get into the higher elevations, there's those aspletias, that first shot that you saw those really interesting endemic daisies that live up in the high Andes, and there's all kinds of orchids. So a really great range of species and things to behold. And then there's also an optional extension that goes into the Santa Marta area, which Michael also talked about. So it's a great opportunity going into some of the beautiful lodgings that are set in some of the most diverse forests in the whole Andean region. So if you have a chance, it's a place to see. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, James, for that update on Ontario Nature. And we do still have spots on that Ontario Nature trip, the second one to Colombia with James in the Magdalena Valley and in the eastern ranges of Colombia, and then with that extension to the Santa Marta Mountains. So if you'd like information, watch for that. Well, we'll make a mention of it in our email to you with the link to today's event. So thank you very much, James, for that. And now it is time to move to our prizes, and we have a number of different prizes tonight. I mentioned some of them already, and we have 3 copies of The Condor's Feather by Michael Webster, with I'm sure much collaboration from Paula Webster. Our first prize, first book, goes to Brenda McCrae. Congratulations, Brenda. It's copy number 1. Copy number 2 goes to Dan Shire. Congratulations, Dan. Copy number 3, I said we had 3 copies, goes to Sandra Eady. Thank you, Sandra, for attending tonight. Our next prize is a beautiful coffee table. It's a cross of a most informative kind of encyclopedic book with a coffee table book format. Amazing photography, mouth-watering, really. This book called New Guinea, Nature and Culture of Earth's Grandest Island. I think anyone would really enjoy looking through this. And this prize goes to Nick Hames. Congratulations, Nick. Thank you for attending. I should mention that we have a tour next September, October to the west part of New Guinea, which belongs to Indonesia, in West Papua. If you'd like to see birds of paradise like this, join a group of just 5 travelers with quest leader Josh Vandermeulen for a fantastic time and introduction to that part of the world. In the spirit of Zambia, I have 1 copy of The Wildlife of Southern Africa. This one goes to Ellie Porter. Congratulations, Ellie. This is yours to have, and you can watch for that in the mail. Another prize, the just released children's book by television personality and biologist Dan Riskin. Many of you may know Dan from formerly of Discovery and now of a science commentator on CTV News. Dan Riskin has just published his book. Dan is loves bats. He's really a bat scientist originally, and he's just penned this authoritative children's book called Fiona the Fruit Bat. Makes a great gift for your children, grandchildren, nieces, grandnieces, or grandnephews, whomever it may be. The winner of this prize is, and it's an autographed version, is Vicky Sherwood. Congratulations, Vicky. And we have 3 gift certificates. Here we have 2 $250s and 1 $500 gift certificate. These go towards a new booking that the winner might make with us. And the winner of the $250 certificate, first winner is Liz Chang. Liz Chang, congratulations. We will be in touch with you The winner of our second $250 gift certificate is Sheila Hall. Congratulations, Sheila. And the grand prize gift certificate of $500 towards a new booking with us is Anita Payne. Congratulations, Anita. So as I mentioned, this event was recorded. You can expect a link to the recording in your email in the next day or so. Thank you so much for being with us tonight and learning, as we all did, a little bit about the world around us, places to consider, places to explore, and watch for our next Quest Nature Tours newsletter on Tuesday, next Tuesday, for news on Zambia. All right. Thanks very much, everyone, and have a good night.